What's in a name? Well, in Hahndorf's case, quite a lot. Dorf is German for village, and it was Captain Dirk Hahn who helped find the land for 38 Lutheran families fleeing persecution in Europe in 1838. For nearly 80 years, they worked hard and everything was fine. But it was war on the other side of the world that brought fear and loathing to this quiet little place. This week, I'm taking the fight up to the peaceful Adelaide Hills hamlet of Hahndorf. I'll climb aboard a modern machine.
Can I nip up there for a
minute? Sure. To play old-time tanks. Talk to the daughter of an unlikely hero.
Oh, skinny and knobbly-kneed and ears sticking out.
Bayonet training. And at our roadshow, I'll discover that big boys...
God! Ah!
Still love big toys.
Is the R compulsory?
I'm afraid it is. It's to get the blood up.
Hahndorf is rolling hills, contented cows, fertile vineyards, and curious sightseers. The sort of place that could surely never be touched by war. But 100 years ago, residents of this idyllic patch of South Australia's wine region were forced to defend themselves, not from guns, but from prejudice. The Prussian culture they brought with them and adapted to their new home now made them a target for persecution.
Oh, cheers, mate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nice little beer for you, Ian.
Oh, thank you, Tony. Oh, magnificent.
Cheers, mate. So why was the anti-German feeling so intense here during World War I?
Primarily because South Australia had 3 times as many Germans per head, 10% of the population, as any of the other states, which other states only had 3%. And so the people felt that they were surrounded by Germans.
But there was no justification for this, was there? There was no fifth column of Australian Germans set on undermining the Australian government.
Not at all. These people had come here to farm. They thought themselves as Australians, and they were shocked by this anti-German feeling. Everything in the paper was Germany's bad. The only good German is a dead German.
Yeah, yeah.
How would you feel if you were born here and had a German name and you're told you're only good if you're dead?
Virtually overnight, 80 years of religious and cultural freedom they'd enjoyed since fleeing their Prussian homelands had withered on the vine. Under the government's War Precautions Act, so-called enemy aliens could be arrested and interned on the flimsiest pretext.
There's one great story about a gentleman went into the local pub and said just to his passing neighbour that the Kaiser couldn't possibly be as bad as the local newspaper made him out to be. And that was enough to put him in an internment camp.
Every state had internment camps, but South Australia's Torrens Island was one of the worst. In 1915, under one brutal CO, there were eyewitness accounts of internees being flogged, stabbed with bayonets and shot. Unfortunately, all records of the camp were lost, so the truth will probably never be known.
So you tried to wipe out all your German background, if possible. They hid their Bibles, they hid their German books, because if the police came into your home and found a German book, then you were immediately under suspicion.
You know things are bad in Australia when even the local watering hole is under threat.
Because, of course, being the German arms, the army thought that there would be a stash of arms in the hotel. So in they marched with the police, bayonets drawn, of course, and looked everywhere for this stash of arms and found Nothing.
Surprise, surprise.
Yes, of course, because they were just for, you know, just pub keepers.
Yeah.
So out they went. But not to be outdone, 2 years later, here they are, back again. And this time they knew for certain there was a secret radio transmitter in the German arms. And found again, nothing.
Yeah. All this police harassment must have driven the pub keepers mad.
Well, finally they gave up. They gave up. And they changed the name of the pub to the name of the town, Hahndorf. So it became the Hahndorf Hotel. But then, the following year, they changed the name of the town to Ambleside. And so that name was changed to the Ambleside Hotel.
But it's not called the Ambleside Hotel now.
No, it was changed back again later.
Well, that's not very confusing at all, is it? Cheers, mate.
Cheers. Thank you, Tony.
Call it whatever you like, but just be thankful Australia's oldest surviving German settlement is still around. Oh, and if you do drop in, try the strudel. It's wunderbar. My next stop's down the road at a little village called Stirling. But you know how it is, an unexpected obstacle, an unscheduled stop. And suddenly, an obscure piece of South Australian war history demands to be told.
Hey, guys.
How are you?
All right.
Hey, Tony.
Did you realise that it was the ancestors of exactly the kind of technology that you're driving that helped win us the First World War? And without it, the Germans might well have won.
No, it's all news to me, mate.
Have you got time for me to tell you?
Oh, I sure have.
The reason I want to tell you is because it all starts with a South Australian bloke called Lancelot de Mol. And in the year 1912, he had this brilliant insight, which was that the next big war wouldn't be like the previous wars, all glory and charging and flags and that stuff. It was going to be about this stuff, mud and trenches, and about that stuff, barbed wire. And the only way to be able to deal with it would be with some kind of armoured tractor in order to get over all the stuff. Can I nip up there for a moment?
Yeah, sure.
The trouble with tractors, as they were at that time anyway, is they could just go backwards and forwards. So he developed this linking system which would enable them to be much more manoeuvrable.
De Mol dubbed it the travelling caterpillar fort. Today, of course, we'd call it a tank. When he presented the idea to the British War Office, de Mol quickly found that the top brass didn't share his colonial vision.
They said, this is ridiculous. The next war will be as wars always are, cavalry, infantry squares, that kind of thing. You're describing a problem that doesn't even exist. So they sent him away. And then the months and the years went on. You can imagine how frustrated he was when the trenches started to arise and the boys were being slaughtered in the trenches. He must have been thinking, look, I have got the perfect machine. This will go over embankments and across rivers and streams and smash through trenches, and all we need to do is stick a few machine guns on it.
Fortunately, de Mol resisted suggestions by his friends to present his plans to the Germans. Eventually, thanks to Winston Churchill's lobbying, we Brits came up with this, Little Willie, which eventually became Big Willie, as they do. The tank's debut at the Somme in 1916 wasn't exactly a triumph, but the potential was obvious. All of which was cold comfort for Lancelot de Mol. De Mol's prototype gathered dust in a basement, and Big Willie and roughly 2,000 of his descendants eventually won the day. Not surprising, really. The Germans only ever had 20 tanks to match them.
They did a big push, and it was because of the force and efficiency of those tanks that the First World War was, in my opinion, finally won. But that was in 1918. Just imagine what would have happened in 1912 if the military had picked up on de Mole's idea. Isn't it at least possible that tens of thousands of lives would have been saved?
The Australian press certainly thought so. In 1924, the Western Mail wrote, "The mourning millions will never know how many of the dead, including 60,000 splendid Australians, would have been saved if the British War Office had been wise in time."
It's amazing stuff. Absolutely amazing.
And of course, without him, you'd be on the dole. You wouldn't have a job.
That's exactly right.
See you guys.
Right, thanks a lot, Tony.
Nice to meet you.
See
Bye.
Oh, back to work.
Right, time for me to be in Stirling. Traditionally a cool summer escape for Adelaide's grandest families. But like Hahndorf's Lutherans, the wealthy businessman who owned this magnificent residence, Beechwood, discovered that German connections came at a price.
Francis Snow was one of the colony's big success stories. He made a fortune selling metals, and by the 1890s, he could afford to buy all this and then set off round the world collecting exotic species to put in his gorgeous garden. What a fantastic life. Couldn't be better. And then, in 1914, one Saturday, he was holding a fete in aid of the war effort right here. And when the fete was over, an armed guard burst in, seized him, dragged him down to his office and charged him with trading with the enemy. In other words, commercial treason.
Apparently, one of Snow's myriad interests was selling copper ore to a German company, and copper ore was used for bullets. At a time when young men right across the empire were volunteering to fight, this was a very serious charge.
After you. Yvonne, what a treat!
Tony?
Thank you very much.
A good scandal always seems better with a good cuppa, so I'm meeting up with Beechwood's Yvonne Rice and local historian Anne Herriman.
Cute face.
We don't really know a lot about the history of Francis Snow. We had a little bit of bits and pieces along the way, so please explain.
OK, so the issue is, what was the charge and was he really guilty? They're the two questions, aren't
Trading
they?
with the enemy. So here we've got the scene, World War I. Amazing hostility towards the German people. Snow himself has strong connections with German high culture and German trade. He's been trading with Germany for many years. And he had a shipload of copper ore ready to go.
His defence was that he didn't actually do any trading, wasn't it?
That was what the contest was actually all about. So he was trying to do it, but the authorities were stopping him from doing it. Now, I think that the judge indicated that he actually had a need to sell, that his commercial status might have been slightly rocky at the time. So
his business was going dodgy. He desperately needed the money.
And he needed to water the plants.
And he had 6 gardeners to support.
But in all fairness, nobody thought that he was doing it in order to advance the German cause, did they?
Well, that was what the local correspondent said. Between the local families, the competitors in the gardening world, they certainly said very clearly he was a scoundrel.
Oh, so the local people turned on him?
Absolutely, yes.
Why? What was it about him that irritated the local people so much?
That he actually had the hide to win the rhododendron, sweet pea and antirrhinum sections at the Stirling Flower Show.
That was it?
That's the real story. There are limits.
One of Snow's neighbours wrote to his son, who was fighting in Europe, "That brute took first prize for rhododendrons. It was a splendid exhibit, but I felt like I should trample it. When I think Snow did his level best to sell copper to Germany, to be made up into cartridges to be fired against you and other soldiers of the Empire, my blood boils.
So you mustn't get too flashy with your garden, must you?
The gruelling court battles took 5 years, and Snow spent many of them under house arrest here at Beechwood. He was eventually found guilty on 3 counts of trading with the enemy, but curiously never went to jail.
But he did get a heavy fine.
Yes, in the nature of £2,000.
And if he hadn't paid that, he would have gone to prison.
Absolutely.
But this is what I love about the story so much, that there were so many people in the court who thought he was a good guy that they shelled out the money immediately.
Yeah, see, there you go. That's South Australians for you.
What about him? Do you think that he was a bad guy?
No, I think he was misunderstood. I don't think someone can create the beauty that he created in this garden as a legacy without having a lot of love and compassion inside. I really don't think he was a bad man.
It's no wonder, really, that Francis never recovered from the scandal that led to his fall from grace. This photograph says it all. It was taken just after the Great War. It's the whole family on the front step. You'd expect to see Dad right there in the middle, wouldn't you? All dominating and patrician. But no, that's him, top right there, all squashed away. Probably wondering why the hell everything went wrong.
I'm in the beautiful Adelaide Hills, hunting down all manner of tales from South Australia's last 100 years of war service. It so happens that the man who first brought me from Hahndorf here to Stirling, the infamous Francis Snow, was defended in court by another well-known resident of the town.
He was a war hero called Arthur Blackburn. Now, if anybody uses the word war hero to me, I immediately tend to think of someone burly like Hercules covered in muscles. So when I heard that Blackburn was a mild-mannered, geeky man, I thought to myself, this is someone I can identify with.
Well, almost. You see, he won a VC and, well, I didn't. Anyway, Green Gables here was Arthur Blackburn's one-time family home.
So they restored the whole house? Yes, I gather so.
And that's where I'm meeting his daughter, Margaret.
Yeah, it's been restored pretty much as it was.
I think of all the photos, this one is my favourite. And it shows quite how skinny he was.
Oh, skinny and knobbly-kneed and ears sticking out.
His brother looks quite bulky compared with him.
He does, and he was quite good-looking, Harry, too.
He's still got the sticky-out ears here.
Oh, indeed, always did. Thank goodness none of us inherited them. He was skinny and not at all like a great fighting soldier. In fact, there were a lot of references to how extraordinary that this skinny solicitor could have won a VC.
Win it he did, though, at Pozières in July 1916, repeatedly charging and then capturing a German trench, while men around him died.
Did you realise when you were a little girl that he was a war hero?
Yes, I think so. I didn't really know what it meant, but I did know that a VC was pretty unusual.
I wonder what it was about him, given that he didn't really have a frame suitable for hand-to-hand combat, that led him to do all these brave things.
Well, I can only think that at the time it was the thing he saw that had to be done, so he did it.
Was he proud of his VC?
Oh, I think he was, yes, but he was also humble, and he insisted that there were very many other soldiers who did very brave things, and not everybody is able to have a VC. But he certainly didn't think of himself as being exceptional in any way.
Having gone through hell once, 47-year-old Blackburn signed up again in World War II. This time, he endured 3.5 years torture and near starvation in a Japanese POW camp.
And this after the Second World War, when he just got back from the prisoner of war camp?
Yes, in 1946. We just met him at the Melbourne railway station, and we were all smiling but all horrified at how thin he was. I think we probably expected him to be thin, but not like that.
It's quite an intriguing look on your mum's face.
Yes, I guess it is. I think it was a mixture of being blissfully happy because he was safely home, but horror at how thin he was.
It was a common refrain after World War II. Malnutrition, disease and brutal conditions had wreaked a terrible toll on the 22,000 Australians captured by the Japanese. 1 in 3 died. And survivors like Arthur Blackburn suffered for the rest of their lives.
He weighed about 6 stone, I think. He looked like a skeleton. And he didn't ever really get his health back.
Are you proud of him?
Oh, yes. Very. Because he was an amazing man. I mean, he had, as well as physical courage, he always stuck up for what he thought was right, whether it was popular or not. And he was a very loving man. I'm very proud of him.
Just up the road in Stirling, there's another very personal tribute to Blackburn at the home of one of his mates, Guy Fisher. The lifelong friends had landed together on April the 25th, 1915.
Guy was badly injured at Gallipoli and was sent back to Australia. And here at his home, next to his shaving mirror, he propped up a photo of himself and his boyhood friends, the ones that he set off to war with. And as he shaved every morning, he wondered what had happened to them. Mind you, he already knew about Posier and Arthur's part in that, long before Arthur got his VC for the fight, because Arthur had already written to him. He wrote, "My dear Guy, we've been having a good old go-in in the big scrap. It's not quite the fun it's cracked up to be, this pushing. We had a pretty hard job, but we gave Fritz absolute hell. It was the biggest bastard of a job I've ever struck. Well, old sport, I must stop this and go out onto the eternal damned parade. Your old pal, Arthur S. Blackburn. P.S. For Christ's sake, destroy this. I'm afraid there'd be trouble if the censor saw it."
Which just goes to show that even a weedy, heroic pillar of the legal world can have a rebellious streak. Perhaps it's that willingness to buck the system, a stubborn refusal to give in, that sets some survivors apart. South Australia's Vivian Bullwinkle was certainly a survivor. If you're not familiar with that name, it's probably because she was a nurse, and their work in war often went unacknowledged. I want to do something about that.
I wonder what today's nurses think of Vivian Bullwinkle, or indeed if they've even heard of her. Hiya. Hey, excuse me, have you ever heard of a nurse called Vivian Bullwinkle?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, yeah, yes, most of you have. You know, you might complain if you have a week with a few 12-hour days in it. The story of Vivian Bullwinkle is extraordinary. How she got through the war, I just find absolutely miraculous. She went as a nurse out to Singapore, and of course the Japanese were attacking Singapore, so she was looking after the dead and the wounded as the retreat happened, and she managed to get on the last civilian boat out of Singapore and hopefully to safety, except no, 2 days later the Japanese bombed her ship. The order was given to abandon ship, but when they abandoned ship, the Japanese fighters strafed the survivors with machine guns.
Remarkably, Bullwinkle and other passengers found safety on nearby Bangka Island off Sumatra. Despite linking up with about 100 British soldiers, there was no choice but to surrender.
The Japanese separated the men from the women, took the men round the corner, and the women heard the shots as they massacred all of the men. And then the Japanese came back again, wiping the blood from their bayonets. And then they ordered all the women into the sea, got out their machine guns and started firing up and down through the surf.
Vivian was hit, but not killed. Hour after hour, she bobbed up and down in the water among the dead. When she was sure the Japanese had left, she dragged herself onto the beach and collapsed unconscious.
And a very long time later, she came round again and discovered that there was one guy who had been injured but had escaped death. And together they tended to each other's wounds for a long time until they eventually realised they were just stuck. They were going to have to surrender to the very army that had just killed all of their friends.
Vivian and 31 other nurses endured 3.5 years as prisoners of the Japanese.
And apart from all the other hideous indignities the women had to suffer, the Japanese wanted to turn them into comfort women, in other words, that they would use their bodies. And so Vivian tried to make sure that their hair was all wild, cover them with filth and stuff, and got them to act like they were really ill, coughing and spitting and phlegming and looking pretty awful. And eventually the Japanese went, oh, I don't want to handle these disgusting women. And they went away. It worked.
Yeah.
But her leadership must have been quite extraordinary, because by the end of the war, only another 8 nurses had died. All the rest survived.
It's an extraordinary story, but I wonder how many more like it we've never heard.
Why do you think the contribution of nurses in the 2 world wars hasn't been recognised more? Is that because, by and large, they're not in the front line?
I think so. It's the fact that they're not, they're seen as sort of periphery. They're in the casualty clearing stations. They've got stray bombs going over. We have evidence where hospitals were strafed and bombed and people died. But the fact that they're just physically not in the front line, I mean, many soldiers, in fact, weren't there either.
I wonder whether during the next 4 years or so, more stories of women in 20th century war will be foregrounded.
Oh, I hope so. I really hope so, Tim, because these are news stories. These are stories that we don't know enough about. These stories are emerging all the time, and they just give a different perspective on the war, and particularly with 100 years on, I think, you know, it's time to sort of look at the effects on society at home as well as the soldiers themselves, and the nurses are a really nice link between the two.
When Japan surrendered, Vivian Bullwinkle appeared before the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal as the only survivor of the Bangka Island massacre. The Japanese officer allegedly responsible had committed suicide, and no one was ever found guilty of the killings.
Extraordinary woman. So I guess the moral of that is stop moaning. For one inspiration, an incredible inspiration. Anyway, sorry to interrupt you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Ask a first-time visitor to the Adelaide Hills region to tell you about its war history, and that's the sort of silence you could probably expect. But as I've already found out in my wanderings, it's there. You just have to know where to look.
This little part of Hahndorf is a bit special because it contains the studios of not one, but two of the country's most important artists. Beyond there is the studio of Hans Heissen, the celebrated landscape painter, and in here is the studio of his daughter. And the story of her life, particularly during the Second World War, I find incredibly fascinating. Look, here she is. Take a look at that. Nora Heissen. That's a self-portrait, and that's when she was in her teens. It's so strong, isn't it? Come and have a look at some of these too. Now, this is much later, 1954. It's really confident nude. This is a sketch from the war years. All over these walls, really, really classy drawings.
Nora Heissen was a trailblazer. At 27, she became the first woman to win Australia's Premier Art Award, the Archibald Prize for Portraiture.
What was the reaction of people to the fact that a woman had won it?
Well, there was a furore in Sydney. Max Meldrum, who was another one of the contestants who'd won it before, was absolutely beside himself because a woman had won it. And he was quoted in newspapers all over the place saying, "A woman should be in the kitchen, a man should be in the studio."
If Meldrum was furious then, he would have been positively apoplectic in 1943, when Nora became Australia's first female war artist.
Initially, she wasn't sent to the front line. Initially, when she took it up in October, she was posted to Melbourne, what was called the Military History Headquarters. And her job was to paint these utterly fearsome women who were heads of the women's services, like the entire army nurses in the Pacific. And one of them, Matron Annie Sage, recognised Nora Heissen's talent and skill and passion and arranged by April the following year for her to be in New Guinea.
Officially, Nora was supposed to capture the role of women at war. But there was only so much this artistic rebel could do with drab khaki uniforms.
So she started to paint the men, but also she painted
This is lovely.
women dancing.
Dance in the Sisters' Mess.
That's right, because she thought war has many aspects and one of them is relaxing.
Yeah.
So she was painting the nurses dancing, sent it back and all hell broke loose. Well, she was actually reprimanded for painting nurses at leisure. They wanted to see them earnestly doing what they were meant to be doing.
Now, this is the kind of stuff that she really wanted to do.
She said being a war artist did strange things to her because she found herself in a cap and gown working in, she said, the sterile atmosphere of ether and whiteness, whiteness referring to the whitewashed walls. And she did a deal with the surgeon because before that she was working outside in the blazing heat of the New Guinea sun. And she said to the surgeon, "If I do a drawing of a sister or two for you, can I work in the operating theatre?" And so that actually became her studio for quite a while in New Guinea.
She was so determined and so manipulative. It does make me smile. I think she would have been a nightmare to have been around, but she was very impressive.
She had to find ways around the army system.
Yeah.
I mean, the army were actually quite inflexible, and here was an artist wanting to do what she was meant to be doing.
But it was hard for her, wasn't it?
Oh,
I mean, her relationships with the nurses initially weren't that good.
Initially, she said they resented the fact that she was a captain. She had pips on her shoulders, and she said they'd been through all kinds of warfare in the Middle East, and she'd just landed there, basically, as a captain. So they resented that.
It wasn't resentment or red tape that finally defeated her, though. A severe skin reaction led to her being sent to North Queensland, where she painted scientists searching for cures for tropical diseases.
Do people recognise the quality of her work?
It took until the 1980s, in fact the late 1980s, early 1990s, for people to suddenly realise they had a top portrait painter. And it's taken people years and years to get used to the fact that a woman could be appointed a war artist. That's the first thing. But the second thing, I think, is that it's taken people a long time to get their head around the fact that a woman could be a war artist in New Guinea, in Finchhafen, just behind the lines. They're actually only just working that out now.
And she was so determined. I love the fact that even when she was very old, and she was almost 93 when she died, wasn't she? That she'd still have a fag in one hand, whiskey in the other, really powerful woman. And you could still see that same tenacious look in her eyes that she'd had in that original self-portrait that she drew when she was just 18 years old.
I like to think wherever Nora is now, those tenacious eyes are still gazing fondly at her hometown. Especially today, because this looks like being a big one, even by Hahndorf standards.
There's quite a buzz here in Hahndorf today, and it's not just the usual strudel and sausage and the influx of tourists come here to get a flavour of the old German experience. The Tony Robinson Tour of Duty roadshow's in town. And by the sound of it, they're just warming up, so I better stop guzzling and get on over there myself. You going to join me? What a great opening, eh? Thank you very much to the Hahndorf Town Band. Very appropriate music, given that Hahndorf is the oldest surviving German community in the whole of Australia. You know, over the last 5 or 6 days, we've been going round this area, looking at the various stories about Hahndorf associated with war, and there's this real strong sense of community here. So many people prepared to share their heritage and boast about it to the world, which is why, of course, you get so many people here every weekend, just like we're here now. So that's just about all I've got to say. Yes, I know, darling. The man's been talking for too long, hasn't he? Thank you for the hint. I'm not going to say any more. Without further ado, welcome to the Tour of Duty Roadshow. Margie, nice to see you again.
And you, Tony.
And you've got another story about Arthur?
Yes, I have. His granddaughter Helen knows all about it.
You've been doing a lot of research, haven't you?
I have done quite a lot of research, and my mother started it off.
What have you found?
Well, we found some photographs that Arthur Blackburn took at Gallipoli and on the way to Gallipoli, and they kind of represent soldiers' experience who are going into a war they knew nothing about.
Can I have a look?
So
when you say this is on the way to Gallipoli, do you mean that they're in North Africa?
Yes, they're in Egypt. That was Arthur's friend Dick Wilton having his hair cut in the desert before Gallipoli.
And here we've got...
range practice at Tel el-Kabir.
This is the lull before the storm.
This is the lull before the storm.
Yeah. This is a curious one. What's going on here?
That's where they're practicing landing. That's before they landed at Gallipoli.
That's the VC winner, Arthur, just behind the Colonel. They must have thought it was so easy, mustn't they, all clambering into a boat? I bet they were all...
Day at the beach.
Yeah.
Day at the beach.
All having laughs. We've got a letter here. I've been under fire at last, and I must say it was an extraordinary experience. No doubt you'll see the details in the newspapers before you get this. And in any case, I'm not allowed to give them. Oh, this is great. Bayonet training. a manual on how to use a bayonet. What does it say? To attack with the bayonet effectively, it requires good direction, strength and quickness during a state of wild excitement and probable exhaustion.
Can I interrupt here, Tony, and demonstrate the bayonet?
You may, although it does say the limit of a range of bayonet is about 5 feet, but more often than not, killing is at close quarters at a range of 2 feet or less.
Exactly. Killing is at close quarters. This is the bayonet that Arthur Blackburn would have used on the rifle, the Lee Enfield rifle. We can... No, let's keep that on, I think. OH&S. Stand back, girls. OK. Bayonet Training, 1915 style.
Yeah.
High port. Guard. Ah!
What was that first word you said?
High port.
High port?
Yes, that's how you hold the gun to make it safe. Then you go into the on guard. Then... Ah! It's the spirit of the bayonet.
Is the R compulsory?
I'm afraid it is. It's to get the blood up. I better put this down, hadn't I?
think you should.
Yes, absolutely.
Can you imagine Arthur doing that?
No.
No.
He was a very gentle, small,
Not
at all ferocious. And miraculously, I think it was because he was so skinny that he didn't get shot at any point during the First World War.
To aim at.
Yeah.
So you're saying that the reason Arthur survived the war and won the Victoria Cross was because he was so skinny the bullets missed him?
Yeah, more or less, yes.
Well, it's a theory.
There was some bravery involved.
I was just having a break about a quarter of an hour ago, and this lady ignores the fact that I'm having my tea break, comes up to me with these most extraordinary photographs. They are very funny, aren't they?
They're fascinating, yes.
Tell us all who took these photos.
These are my grandfather's photos. He was a prisoner of war in Germany and Italy, and these are the theatre productions that the prisoners put on while in camp.
Now, I don't know about you, but when the word Stalag Luft is said, I don't think of the Desert Song. And there they are, all in their Arab dress. What have we got here?
Gypsy Rose.
Gypsy Rose. And this has got to be the funniest of the lot. This is the complete cast of Razor Laugh, including 20 male prisoners of war in full drag. Now, where on earth do you reckon they got all those clothes from?
I don't know. I think a lot of them were actually supplied by the Germans to them.
Bizarre.
Yeah, I think a lot of the entertainment they were allowed to do to keep them in there, to stop them from trying to escape.
In order for you not to escape, I will give you a woman's clothing. This is great too, isn't it? They set up their own Royal Ascot Day. There they are, the Ascot Gold Cup Day. And here are the horses.
They handmade all their horses and painted them and took bets.
Well, I'm sure life in a German prisoner of war camp was hell, but clearly there were times when they had a bit of a laugh, which is a bit of a relief, isn't it? Thank you.
The normally buzzy tourist town of Hahndorf is even buzzier today. The Tour of Duty Roadshow will do that to you.
Angela, you've come along to tell us about Tom McGovern, who was serving in France with the 32nd Battalion. What happened to Tom?
Well, Tom was injured in a battle, badly injured in the arm, but he kept fighting.
Right.
And because of his action that day, he won the military medal.
So he was awarded the military medal?
Yes.
OK. For bravery in the fields, it says.
That's right.
But Tom's story goes on beyond the medal because he was lying in no man's land wounded. What did he do?
He was rescued after a couple of hours. And there was so much fighting going on that the ambulance stretcher bearers dropped him along the way, picked him up again, took him off, had his arm amputated above the elbow, and he was given an artificial arm.
An artificial arm made of light wood?
Yep.
And this is what he used and wore for the rest of his life?
No.
No?
No,
Tell me
he
the
didn't.
story.
He hated it. He said it was too cumbersome. He could do a lot more without it. Didn't wear this, and that's why it's in such good condition, because it's sat on top of a wardrobe.
So Tom's not wearing an arm.
He's not wearing an arm.
Surmounting his disability.
Yes.
And I noticed in the photograph here that he's surmounting it to the degree that this is him here, I imagine, playing cricket.
Yes. He was very sporty before the war, and that didn't stop. There was no way he was going to let his injury get in the way of things, so he continued to play tennis. He played cricket and he took up golf. He
got on with it.
Got on with it, and he had many friends who had lost limbs, and one of his best friends was a farmer who'd lost both his legs, high-level amputation. And I think when he had friends like that...
This didn't seem so bad. Yeah. Angela, thanks for bringing in this reminder of the Great War 100 years on. Thank you.
Pleasure.
I love little things like this that Carol's brought in. Get lots of stories of heroes and fighting and stuff. This is very much the home front, isn't it, Carol? Who did this book belong to?
The book belongs to my grandmother. She was Caroline Warner.
Yeah.
That was her maiden name. And this is her recipe book.
So this is all it is. It's a recipe book, but the interesting thing about it is some of the crossings out. So what is this a recipe for?
On page 2, there's a recipe for German coffee cake.
Yeah.
She's crossed out German and penciled in Belgium.
So suddenly German coffee cake becomes Belgian coffee cake. It's not very subtle, is it?
Here's a page for French delight. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Neither had I. And when I read it, it's the ingredients of Turkish delight. Now she doesn't like the Turks.
Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just a story. This is a bit of a ceremony as well. Tell us the story, Peter.
Well, Tony, the story is that this is Angus and Thomas Boston. They were South Australians from Narracourt. They enlisted together and they died together on one day in the Great War. And they're both buried in the same cemetery now. And there's pictures of their graves. But I noticed that Angus, this man, he hasn't got a particular grave. He's got what's called a special memorial, which means he's buried in the cemetery at Nuriel somewhere, but nobody knows where. And they were both awarded service medals. Those medals are missing.
And how are those two young men related to you?
They are great uncles of mine. One was shot and the other one went out to actually save him. And he got shot too.
Now, the ending of this story is that out of the blue, someone said that they'd found one of your great uncle's medals, yeah?
Yes. Thanks to Gary and medals gone missing.
This is an organisation that tries to link medals with their families.
Yes. He actually come across it on the internet and he looked up Boston's in Narracourt because that's where the boys enlisted from.
Well, after all this time, on behalf of your great uncle Angus, I can now give you the Victory Medal. Thanks for sharing so much with me this afternoon. To end, I'd like to share something with you, which I think might be quite appropriate, given that we're in the oldest surviving German colony in Australia. Yesterday afternoon, we were filming just round the corner there in the main street, and this bloke came up to me. I was sitting in the car, I rolled down the window, and he said, I've got some diaries from my grandmother, which I think might be of interest to you. And they were absolutely brilliant. And I just wanted to read you a piece. This is where she's writing about a letter she's just received from her brother, who was in the trenches in the First World War. She says, I got some very interesting letters from Fernley telling me how his men and the Germans fraternised for Christmas Day and how he went over into their trenches and then his men and the Germans shook hands and gave cigars and cigarettes and a liqueur brandy. How ludicrous it all is, Fernley says. He says he won't forget this Christmas Day 1914 ever. Goodbye. Thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Tony Robinson. If you love my show and want to see some more amazing history stories, then please hit the subscribe button, click the notification bell, and we'll let you know when there's something new to watch. Enjoy.